Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we're back at the wall of ships in the old Szymanski homestead because you guys were asking about some of these models. We're not going to do a video talking about all the ships, but we'll focus on each one individually as we get to them. So today I have my Akagi model. This is one of the newer releases from Kobe. This one's the executive edition. It was released maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago as of the filming of this video in July 2024. And there's also a normal Akagi or a non-executive edition Akagi that is about to release. Anyway, the main differences are this comes with a minifigure, the ship's captain, and he's got a map table, which is a great addition to another set. Or a great thing to display with this set. In fact, the stand for this came with a little piece where you could have him standing in front of it. I chose not to display it that way, but that's an option. And also comes with twice as many aircraft for the flight deck. Definitely worth getting the executive edition if you can, but remember it's a limited run. There will be much more of the regular edition around. So, Akagi is one of my favorite aircraft carriers of all times. She is one of Japan's first aircraft carriers, and so she very much shows the transitional development. And believe it or not, there is a tie-in to USS New Jersey that we'll get to in a second here. So Akagi is one of Japan's first aircraft carriers. She's originally being built as a battle cruiser, but the Washington Naval Treaty forces this Akagi class battle cruiser to be canceled, but there's a clause in there that allows her to be built as an aircraft carrier, the battleship Kaga to be built as an aircraft carrier. Actually, the clause is for Akagi, but the Great Kanto earthquake bumps that to Kaga. And then the United States get to build Lexington and Saratoga as aircraft carriers, and Great Britain gets to turn Furious, Courageous, and Glorious into aircraft carriers. So the conversion of battle cruisers, the capital scouting ships of the fleet, into aircraft carriers, the capital scouting ships of the fleet, in the 1920s, thanks to the Washington Naval Treaty, really spurs the development of aircraft carriers. Initial aircraft carriers, ships like Langley, Hosho, Argus, they're converted from much smaller types of ships. Slower ships like a Collier in Langley's case. Hosho is purpose-built, but she's still a relatively small ship. She's not a capital ship by any means. Sometimes battleships like the British Eagle, which again, they're slow, they're short, they have very limited capabilities. And the short size means a short flight deck, which limits the number of aircraft that can be on board, and the size of aircraft, especially when you combine it with these early ships' really slow speeds, somewhere in the 20-knot range. Because part of how the aircraft get lift is these ships sailing into the wind. So faster ships can sail into the wind faster, which creates more lift, which means bigger aircraft can get off. So aircraft carrier development is going slowly, going slowly, going slowly, and then turning large ships like Akagi into aircraft carriers really advances them several generations. And you go from this experimental technology to fleet carriers like this one overnight. Akagi is very cool because she actually shows two separate generations. She's iterative. So as initially built, and I would love to see one of you master builders out there convert this great kit here into the original construction of Akagi. She has a pair of 8-inch turrets down here, and she has 3 flight decks stacked along the bow. And it makes sense because it means that you can be landing and launching planes simultaneously, which is really hard to do with a single straight deck carrier like this. It's why we go to angled deck carriers after World War II. But really good idea. They thought that as scouting ships, these were going to run into cruisers all the time. Initial aircraft had both relatively short range and relatively light payloads. They couldn't really threaten enemy ships, especially large ships. So they had a lot of 8-inch guns. So during this interwar period, Akagi goes through another iterative change where those 8-inch turrets up forward are deleted. She loses 4 total barrels, but she retains, very cool down here, you can see them. She retains 6, 3 on each side, casemate 8-inch guns. But she also gets this full-length flight deck with the extra extension of the hangar going further forward, which allows her to carry more aircraft. And so this really makes her a modern fleet carrier, one of the best in the world at the beginning of World War II. She, of course, is present during the attack on Pearl Harbor. She's the flagship of the Kido Butai, the Japanese strike force. And then she's present during all of the actions subsequent where the Japanese are expanding their empire. When they go into the Indian Ocean, Akagi is still the flagship. And of course, during the Battle of Midway, Akagi is the flagship, and that's when she is lost. And I have chosen to modify my kit in two very small ways. The kit you get shows the ship as she would have looked around the attack on Pearl Harbor. But I modified in two ways, like I said. I highly encourage you guys to modify all the kits you get. They tend to give them to you as kind of broad examples of their career, and then you can go on, add stuff, take stuff off to make them look like they would have on a specific date. And I prefer to build my models to a specific time period, not just a generic, here is this ship as she would have looked some of the time. So first off, I removed one of the twin 25 millimeter guns from right here. It's just an extra piece. She only ever had 3 twin mounts in this gun tub here. And two, half of her guns were in like armored gun houses. They had shields on them, and the other half were in open gun mounts. We now know from the recent exploration of her wreck that by the time of Midway, they had removed the shields from all the mounts. It wasn't really protecting you, and it was obscuring their vision. So I have built this like she would have looked at Midway, with the all the mounts unshielded. So just use some spare pieces to throw that together. And I'm really, really happy with this kit. In general, I prefer building the battleship models as opposed to aircraft carriers because there isn't much to build on the carriers. You're building the hull, just a bunch of parallel stuff, and then you get up to the flight deck and you've got this little island build, and there's not a whole heck of a lot there. Whereas with the battleships, you get to throw guns on all over the place, and you get a big complex superstructure. And I didn't feel that way with Akagi, because you can see the detail of the hangar, the ship's boats back here. She's got gun mounts down in the hull, in addition to the stuff around the flight deck. It did not feel like 3/4 of the build was tedium building the hull just so you can get a ship. It felt like you were doing the cool stuff during the entire build. So I really enjoyed this build, and it sits right across from my USS Enterprise, which I have also modified to look like she would have at the Battle of Midway on June 4th, 1942. So, how does this tie into New Jersey? The Battle of Midway shows the superiority of aircraft carriers, but it also shows an attrition in aircraft carriers. The United States has now fought 2 carrier battles, and they've lost 2 carriers. There are more battles to come, and the United States has been very fortunate and has more or less won these 2 battles. So they are losing ships quicker than they can afford to. There are a bunch of large Essex-class carriers on the ways, but they're going to take a while to get there. So the United States looks at converting battleships like New Jersey into aircraft carriers. There's actually a series of design studies that are started right around the time of the Battle of Midway in June of 1942 of looking at pretty much all of the ships that are under construction right then. Cleveland-class cruisers, Baltimore-class cruisers, Alaska-class large cruisers, and Iowa-class battleships. Of course, by this time, the North Carolina and South Dakota battleships, they're not necessarily all completed, but they're doing final fitting out. It doesn't make sense at that point to then raise them to the deck and start over again. Plus, they don't quite have the speed of any of those other ships. All of the other ships I named are 30+ knots. So the Navy looks at increasing the number of flight decks they have by doing that. And there's actually a design for the Iowa class as aircraft carriers that's really, really interesting because it's essentially a more armored Essex class aircraft carrier. If you look at this line drawing right here, you can see it's essentially an Essex-class superstructure and the exact same anti-aircraft layout as the early Essex-class designs. Now, obviously, this modification doesn't happen. The Design Bureau rejects it, so you never see it built. But if you had seen this ship completed, then you would have likely seen the same anti-aircraft updates that you see on the Essex class. Like I said, the drawing depicts the exact same battery as the Essexes were designed with, but by the end of the war, the Essexes have twice that many guns. And you would have seen the same thing on the Iowa. They're roughly the same length, they're roughly the same width, so they would have made great ready-made carriers, right? Lexington, Saratoga, Akagi, Kaga, they all are these converted battle cruisers that made really great carriers? Not really. There's a reason why the design was rejected. So, when you haven't developed carriers or carrier doctrine, having these ready-made large carriers just introduced to your fleet is a really great thing. But they're not ideal. Akagi is still built on a battle cruiser hull, so you can see it gets really narrow at the bow, really narrow at the stern. Look at how much space there is on each end of the ship here that there's not enough room for hangar space. It's just not wide enough. So they're losing out on a lot of aircraft capacity that a purpose-built carrier that is not as finely hauled would have. Also, these ships retain their original armor belts. Akagi still has her battlecruiser belt, which was pretty thick for a battlecruiser. The Iowa conversion would have retained its belt. And that's way more armor than you need, and it's not armor in the right place. The places where carriers take damage is their flight decks, their hangar decks. That's where they store their planes. That's where a lot of the munitions are when these things are being loaded. In fact, Akagi is lost because the aircraft being rearmed and refueled in her hangars are detonated by American bombs. Those spaces are largely unarmored. Her armored belt that is protecting the hull of the ship is not defeated by any of the American weapons. And yet the ship is still lost because she loses her capacity to carry aircraft, and all that stuff burns so hot that it overcomes everything below it despite the armor not being defeated. So it's a lot of weight and expense in armor that's already been built and installed that you don't need, that could easily be converted into more speed or more hangar space, or it could be used in other ways. And so for the Iowa class aircraft carrier mod, whereas a regular Essex can hold right around 100 aircraft total, your Iowa class carries about 70, especially because of how fine these ships get towards the bow. Their hangar just doesn't have the same volume as a truly designed carrier like the Essex is, a ship of roughly the same size. They would be still about 20,000 tons heavier because of that armor, and they'd be significantly less capable. At the end of the day, it's unlikely that New Jersey would have ever been the one to get that conversion because she and Iowa were relatively complete. It was too late in the building process to easily throw hangars and bomb magazines on and remove the turrets and do all the other stuff. It was possible for Missouri and Wisconsin, and it was likely not going to happen for Illinois and Kentucky because they were not far enough along. It would make more sense to just cancel them and put all their metal towards building new aircraft carriers. At the end of the day, the United States chooses not to convert the Iowas, not to convert the Alaskas, not to convert the Baltimores, although eventually they do come back with a carrier designed on a Baltimore hull. They only select the Cleveland-class light cruisers being built in Camden, New Jersey, to be converted into the Independence-class light carriers. And as carriers become more capable during World War II, you see lots of countries try to convert ships into carriers. Japan certainly does it with several of their ships, including battleships like Issei and Hyuga. Partial aircraft carrier conversion in those cases. You see merchant ships converted into aircraft carriers. You see ocean liners being converted to aircraft carriers. But probably the Independence class were the most successful of all of those designs. So in her time period, when she was converted, it made sense for Akagi, but converting an Iowa-class battleship into an aircraft carrier didn't really make sense. It didn't end up being a good design. So before we end this video, I just want to show you my favorite feature of the whole kit. This is my first Kobe kit that uses Technic style pieces, and it's really cool because it allows both elevators to actually depress to the hangar levels and then elevate back up to the flight deck. And that's such a cool feature for this kit. And one of those things that made it really interesting to build from start to finish, as opposed to some other kits I've built in the past. So if you're interested in this Akagi kit or most of the other ships here on the wall of ships I have, check out buildkobe.com. And remember to always get the executive edition if it's available. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like buildkobe.com. We really appreciate their support. You can support us by liking, sharing, subscribing so more people find about the museum and our channel, or by clicking on the link in the description below to check out Build Kobe, or by clicking the donate button down below. Thanks for watching. Hello, Trooper.